Bill and Ted Face the Music, directed by Dean Parasot and starring Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, continues the story of the Wild Stallions, the band destined to unite the world with their music. Bill and Ted, now married with each of them having a daughter with their respective wives, they continue to attempt to write the song that unites the world. However, it's more urgent now than ever to write that song. With the world destined to descend into chaos without the song, a struggling Bill and Ted hope to achieve the impossible and fulfill their destiny. Alright, so it feels good to review a new movie again. Not that I don't love reviewing the requests, but it is nice to mix things up every now and then and experience some newly released content as well. Bill and Ted was never a film that was destined to make a boatload of cash, so I do think sending it to video on demand, considering the circumstances and the climate we're undergoing with the pandemic, it was the right call. I'm honestly, just myself, happy that this movie was made at all, because I am a huge fan of the original. Not so much the second film, but the original, in my opinion, is fantastic. Thankfully, this film is very similar to the first and delivers a satisfying resolution to the story of Bill and Ted. I don't think this is an amazing movie. I don't think this is as good as the first, not quite as good as the first, but I do think it's very funny and very enjoyable overall. It's also worth noting that since Bill and Ted are fathers this time around, there is slightly more heart to this story than the original because, they are fathers and there's that family dynamic present there. There's not a ton of time exploring their relationship with their daughters. In fact, I think it takes a little bit too much of a backseat at times to the adventuring, but I do think the moments we spend with them, together are pretty touching. The daughters are essentially exactly like their fathers, and they do everything in their power to support them no matter what, which adds some heart and some levity, and even more levity than that's already there, and quality themes about family to the story. Bill and Ted still do take the lead here, but you actually spend a decent amount of time with the daughters doing similar adventuring, and I didn't mind this. I thought Samara Weaving and Bridget Lundy Payne were both really likable in their roles, probably because they're exactly like Bill and Ted. They feel like extensions of Bill and Ted, so that made the adventuring with them equally as fun. However, the primary draw here is obviously seeing Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves bring these characters back to the screen, and thankfully, they do a most excellent job. They honestly feel the same. I mean, they look different, but they feel the same, which is, I think, what most people were wanting out of this movie. They want something that makes them feel at least a little bit like the original. And Bill and Ted are obviously much older in this film, but much of the plot revolves around the fact that they haven't evolved. They're married, they each have a kid, but they're still the same guys we loved back in the first movie. This is both a good and a bad thing in my eyes. I definitely wanted something that made me feel like the first movie, which the movie does very effectively, but I also wanted to see how the characters have evolved after all this time. And by the end of the film, I'd say that they do actually evolve, and that's great, but I will say that the film can at times feel a tad too familiar. That said, I think it's really funny. I think Bill and Ted's charming delivery obviously helps, as it always has, but the writing is actually pretty good this time too. For example, there's a scene in the early stages of the film where Bill and Ted actually go to couples therapy and their wives are there, and maybe they thought they'd be able to work out their own issues, individually as individual couples. And Bill and Ted actually come together and they both bring their wives, and they make the remark that there are a couple of couples in couples therapy. And things just get worse from there, and I won't spoil it any further than that. But even when Bill and Ted are making mistakes, they are too charismatic to dislike. This makes the experience fun because they're the best companions you can have on a zany adventure like this. They have a great attitude, they're funny, they're engaging, and it just makes for a good time. But something else the movie does, if only briefly, is to address how Bill and Ted deal with failure. Since the last time, they've struggled. Since the last time we've seen them, they've definitely struggled a lot. And much of this film is trying to find themselves in a way that will allow them to, fulfill their destiny, their grand destiny. I like this because it did add at least a little bit of depth to these characters that weren't particularly known for their depth beforehand. I think this could have been a little bit deeper, more meaningfully explored, but I also at the same time understand it's a movie that's meant to be fun. It's meant to provide laughs and feelings of positivity, and I think it does that very effectively. I think this is something many of us do need right now in our current climate. So I would happily recommend Bill and Ted Face the Music if you're looking to jump into something for, that's fun for a little bit. I think there's a finality to this film that works. It does provide a good conclusion to the story, but I can't say that it was my preferred ending. I think that it is a subversion, one that does mostly make sense, but I do feel it's slightly a retcon. It didn't ruin my enjoyment of the film by any means. I don't think it's awful by any stretch, but I do think it's a little underwhelming based on how significant this moment was built up to be. I think the ending is going to work really well for a lot of people, and some like myself will be okay with it, but just not in love with it. I have a hard time believing anyone's going to hate this ending. But there is one final point I want to make here for fans of the original. One of the best parts of the original film was the traveling through time and bringing historical figures into other times. This happens again in this film, and it's awesome. This time, some really cool historical figures are brought into the fold, and it just makes for a really good and fun time. Just as they did in the first one, the historical figures are chosen wisely, and each brings some sort of charm to the overall package. Overall, this film is just a blast, and something that I think a lot of people will really enjoy right now. As for the pros cons, for the pros, Bill and Ted Face the Music delivers awesome characters, lots of comedy and fun, a great continuation of an iconic story, and enough heart to balance out that story. As for the cons, I think the characters could have been explored and developed a little bit further, and the ending wasn't perfect in my eyes, but solid enough. I'm going to give Bill and Ted Face the Music an 8.5 out of 10 and highly recommend you check it out. I think if you're looking for a fun time, this is the movie for you. So did you guys watch Bill and Ted Face the Music yet? If so, let me know what you thought of it. If not, let me know whether you plan to watch it or not. Also, let me know whether you're a fan of the original two films. I love the first myself, but as I mentioned, didn't love the second, but the third one worked really well for me. My favorite is still the first, but the third one is really good too. Either way, this is WillFoxification signing off. I'll see you guys in the next review.